All right, and we're back, everyone, to our lounge alley. This is the project stream, part 48, and I'm going to jump right into the sesh. This is something I'm working on. For those of you who are just tuning in, it's a character concept. If you guessed the guy playing the upright bass, you're right. That is the character that I've been focusing on. He's basically an android who doesn't have a mouth, and his face is basically emojis. So whenever he feels certain emotions or he wants to express himself, a different emoji starts to pop up on the face. But very skilled musician, beautiful music. And I just wanted him to be in this environment full of people. You know, he's a robot. He's around people who are completely enwrapped by technology. And they're wearing these devices. They're totally, like, as you could see with one of the characters all the way on the right, they're so enwrapped in the device that they're wearing that they're like blindly feeling their way through the streets as they're just looking at whatever it is that's on screen. So it's just this interesting play, I would say, like a robot who's playing beautiful music, something that's supposed to be very, very spiritual, very soulful, around a bunch of people who are supposed to have that completely enwrapped by technology. In this futuristic setting. If you guys haven't guessed it, or if you've noticed it, I've got flying cars in the background. Something that I think is very much a comic book thing. Like, I'm still thinking about it now, and I'm like, well, what would that be possible in reality? You know, like, it would have to be some immaculate technology, you know, or some sort of force fields maybe that block buildings from being crashed into by flying cars, or somebody who's like either a drunk driver or something, you know, or somebody who's reckless, or someone who becomes crazy. Like, imagine how many cars in buildings there would be. But I would think, yeah, it would have to be like really immaculate technology that maybe goes into like pilot mode if something goes wrong, or it like sets itself into parking mode where it just like stops and lowers itself to the ground, for it to be repaired, or for it to be looked into, or if the person is driving recklessly or something like that. Like, maybe one of those kind of things, right? Or just like areas designated only for flying cars away from buildings. It's hard to imagine that it's something that would be part of reality. I mean, we've got planes now, and there are real strict regulations, but there's no buildings around, you know. So I wonder how that would play into reality if it ever was to become a thing. I do think that eventually it will be, you know, just because people's desire for wanting to travel and, you know, seeing interesting things come to life. I think eventually that's gonna be a thing. Maybe when force fields are a thing, you know, where they're able to, like, in case somebody does end up becoming incredibly reckless, like, the buildings would have these precautions to make sure. Trying to get better at drawing buildings and making them interesting, especially if it's futuristic looking buildings. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to study just to show you guys real quick, I was doing a study of Moebius's work. Beautiful work. Absolutely love his work. One of the most creative comic book artists out there. His stories, it's not even just what he's drawing, it's the stories, and yeah, the themes in them are very, very cool. Like, just look at that. And this is, whoops. This is the study, something that I've been working on. I'm still working on it. I'm actually doing that on my free time. And the little amount of free time that I have, just little by little constructing it. And just trying to pick up on all these things. Like, some of this stuff, you look at it and it's really hard to decipher what it is. Like, what's going on over here, you know? I guess you could think of them as either pillars or windows. Now, there are certain lines here, little dots here. You know, these designs right here are pretty cool. And of course, this right here is awesome. I love that. And anything in this area in general is very, very cool. I love it. Took time to really focus on it, but the structures are very futuristic. The colors are beautiful as well. I really enjoy the kind of colors that he used for it. And it all kind of goes together, despite them being very different from the background colors. You know, there's a repeating, like, tan color, I guess. Slightly orange, slightly brown. Light colors. But these two buildings obviously really attract my attention. And I like his color play, you know, because you do have that building in a very background. And because it's darker, it's showing depth. You know, it is showing some sort of depth. If it was the same color as, let's say, the pillar or even this building right here, it would kind of flatten out the image. But because it's there, it really gives some perspective. But these two buildings, I mean, the whole scene, I can't even pick anything specific. It's all of it combined together. That's what makes it such a great drawing. This area right here, yeah, all of that. This playing a very important role too, to this side of the drawing. You know, the round sort of shapes here, the curved shapes here. They kind of break up the image, and you know, you're seeing all these lines here. So this kind of breaks that up. These two break up that consistency. So compositionally, excellent, right? Creatively, excellent. Can't help but continue to gush about it. And just like little details too, like just notice that, right? Like, if you look at these windows and they have these like designs around them, even though the windows are kind of simple, the designs make them interesting. This little banner here is very cool. It's things like that. You would think that, you know, you look at this, these guys, obviously you're reading the speech bubble, but this is going on in the background, and it plays such an important role. I mean, can't talk enough about it. Kind of speechless, right? At how amazing the work is. I'm trying to learn from that and be a little bit more creative with the backgrounds. You know, having to draw these I don't want it to only be about the characters. You know, despite it being fun to draw them, as you guys could see, there's a lot of fun in constructing buildings, and that's something that I've put off for a while. I will say that. I'll honestly admit that drawing buildings was not my favorite thing. It just seemed like such a technical thing. You know, back then it was just like, oh, it's very like architectural. It's very methodical, and I just really liked the expressiveness of like drawing a figure and capturing the likeness and bringing human to life with the drawing. That was really exciting, and I just didn't spend as much time drawing buildings. But over time, you know, I started to really appreciate them, and how much of an important role they play in creating atmosphere and creating a vibe. Like, I don't think this scene would be as fun if the buildings weren't there, if there weren't there wasn't some interesting architecture around to give the viewer a sense of like, what period is this? You know, what are people doing? I recently went back on an old drawing and I made some corrections that I noticed, and one of them was exactly what I'm working on right now, which is not pushing my lines back. So for instance, the thickness of the building, the lines of the buildings shouldn't be as thick as, let's say, the lines of the characters in the foreground. You know, there is an importance to having consistent line thickness. You know, for instance, I've seen some drawings where the contrast between the lines is extreme. So they'll have like the outlines of the figure, right? And it's like really thick outlines. And then inside the figure, the features, for instance, like the jawline, it would be really thin, like hair thin lines, basically. And hair thin details, like, you know, cross hatchings. And that drastic difference didn't make it appealing for me personally. I think it just what does it signal? What's a good way to describe it? Lack of attention for, it's hard to say aesthetic, right? Because aesthetic varies from person to person. Some people find that appealing, but I want to say it's challenging words to try to describe it. It's too stark of a difference, accompanied by lines that are uncertain. Like, you could see the uncertainty in the lines themselves. You know, there's a difference between, I want to say, like these kind of lines and somebody who's like trying to do the same thing, and it being like kind of messy and not really following a certain pattern or anything in terms of the thickness or the thinness. You know, just looks kind of messy. And I think what appeals to a lot of people, you know, even non-artists, is the confidence and certainty in the stroke. So if each brush stroke, pencil stroke is pretty consistent, it just shows how much control that person has over their pencil. It just shows good craftsmanship. Really, that's what it comes down to. I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Is those consistencies in lines tend to show good craftsmanship, good skill, and control over the pencil or whatever medium that you're using, brush or whatever. And I think that really adds to the appeal of the drawing. So yeah, I was just revisiting an old drawing and I was like, I like the concept, but I could see how I made the mistake of like making certain lines a little too thick where they don't need to be. For instance, like I drew some clouds and the clouds had really thick outlines, even though it was like a dark scene. You know, in that case, I could easily just hide the lines with the rest of the cloud. I think it's more appealing if there was some perspective on this building. think that looks better. I also want to add something to these buildings. I think they're kind of isolated. You know, there doesn't seem like there's much going on behind them. So I'm gonna need to add a little bit more. And what I'm trying to watch out for, and this is something that's important, is not connecting lines here. So for instance, this is going to be another part of the building, but if I was to draw this line further down and connect it with this part of the building, it just makes it less interesting, and it melts everything together. Whereas to create more dynamic scenes and really pop things out, I'm trying to avoid connecting these lines. So for instance, in this case as well, if I was to draw the end of the building and I was to connect it with that, you see this right here. I'm gonna use a different color, but that right there, that's a bad choice. It's a bad choice of lines. So in order to avoid it, I'm either gonna do it behind it or in front of it. In this case, I just think behind would be better. And I want to make it into like a parking lot for flying cars. So rather than landing, they could just fly into these little sections here. Maybe have some like overhead lights here for times when it's at night. like a post to indicate that this is parking zone. Follow the same pattern here. Again, avoiding connecting lines. And I noticed it's easier actually to like work on perspective once you got a couple of buildings down, because you could really follow the pattern of the lines from the building. So just for example, here, you got these lines coming, right? And you could follow the building behind it, could follow that in order to make sure that things are in perspective. Since it is behind it, it's a little bit easier to follow that guide. And if you really wanted to make things more apparent, like where that horizon line is, you could follow all those lines all the way until they meet at a point to get a better idea of like, okay, well, where do they stem from, or how far do they go, and where is that horizon line? It's a quick tip in terms of perspective. It's something that I'm going to cover probably much later in either in a comic stream or figure drawing. And at some point it might just switch to drawing basics. For now it's focusing on the figure, but drawing basics might give it a more of like an encompassing sort of stream where I can talk about perspective as well. So that's something in the future. But I think once you understand, just going back to when I was younger and I was like avoiding buildings, I think once you understand perspective and how to create these scenes, because at the time it was very intimidating because I didn't understand it. Like I didn't really get how do you develop these points. It was very confusing, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I shied away from actually developing background scenes. I don't know. I think it's still kind of they still kind of meld into each other. So it's important to break up the design. think these other buildings I'm just gonna leave undefined and just like show some windows to suggest buildings. Sometimes my eye gets used to certain things and it's hard to tell if it's better without them or with them. You know, maybe compositionally, you know, it's better not to have it there, but because my eye is so used to that detail, it feels like something is missing. But I'm gonna go with it not being there. Just looks better. But yeah, for example, here, in like this section that I'm drawing, it's kind of easy to maintain the perspective because the box above it is just the guideline. You know, I can draw the line underneath it as long as it's parallel to this line, then it's all gravy. And the same thing applies for something else. Like if I decide to draw another one that's below it, as long as it follows it's parallel to the line above it and below, then it makes sense. And I think I just have to study more buildings, really, to get better idea of like, well, what can you add to make them look more interesting? Because right now it just feels like I'm drawing boxes within boxes within boxes. I think little details, as you guys saw in here, they're just little patterns. Like if you were to look at this right here, like this section right here, like what's going on over there? It's a nice pattern. That's what's going on. So it's just coming up with interesting, you know, we're like, what's going on over here? It's just interesting patterns, and that play a really important role compositionally. You know, it does add depth. Like this window right here adds depth. This adds depth as well to the building itself. And then, you know, these little designs right here as well. That's beautiful. But it doesn't look cluttered, and at the same time, it doesn't look monotonous. And that's kind of what I'm trying to avoid here. Like, I don't want to keep having these monotonous windows, because even if that does exist, right, if you look at cities now and you look at the cityscape, you just see buildings and it's just a bunch of boxes with box windows. The architecture is a little bit boring, but that's the entire point of this, is that, you know, you should be able to just get creative and draw things the way you want them to be. Like, that's the beauty of it. And it also really highlights, I mean, just what the responsibility is of a comic book artist, right? Because you're not just drawing characters, you are also constructing buildings. You're looking at buildings and trying to make them interesting. So you're understanding architecture, you're understanding face expressions, you know, you're understanding these little things about stores, the boutiques, and you know, the graphics that you're going to put on them. So it's like there's so much costume design, there's so much that goes on for a comic book artist. For people to say that it's not a real skill or it's not an art form, it's just ridiculous. It's arrogant, for one, you know, because it's not being totally unaware of all those aspects and making such a broad, bold statement. It's incredibly arrogant. But for the most part, you know, that's something that I talk about very frequently. It doesn't matter. You know, whatever people are saying, it makes absolutely no difference, because you're not doing it to get approval from people and for them to be like, oh, yeah, you know, this is real art. You're doing it because you really like drawing. You know, you're creating scenes, you're creating all these ideas. That's what it's really about. So just a little, just a couple of words of encouragement there. People get too caught up on these like criticisms and judgments and people's opinions, and they forget, like a lot of people forget, that the entire purpose of art in general, is expression. Just being able to do all these cool things and create. That's just always been my motivation for whatever it is, whether it's like music or writing or any form of art, really. I think that's the beauty of it. something also that Jimi Hendrix talked about, if you guys missed it. There is a stream, it's in the highlights section. So if you guys go into the videos section on Twitch and then filter based on collections, you'll see a highlights folder where I upload special streams. Once in a while I do special intros, special outros, so you can find all of them there. And one of them is an interview of Jimi Hendrix. I think it was the Dick Havoc show. I don't remember. It was a while ago. It was one of the first few special intros, I guess. But yeah, he talks about exactly that, how a lot of artists end up getting, fat and satisfied from all the compliments and appraisal and, people being like, oh, you're this, that, and the other, and idolizing, that they forget what it's all really about, and they just start catering more and more to the audience and forget about like the entire expression and the beauty of art. Just basically, like, that's what selling out is, basically. And with that, their art starts to suffer. Like, they produce less and less interesting work and more generic, ego-driven work. So yeah, Jimi Hendrix talks about that. He makes some good points in general. Like, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to include that that interview, is because he really makes some great points about a lot of things, about the art industry and about music. So check that out, y'all. It's a pretty fun video. And all these lines, it's still in the sketch phase. This is why you guys are seeing red and blue on here. I started out with like the blue as like the initial sketch of everything, just really basic boxes and shapes, general shapes to put placement. And then just used red for a little bit more definition to flesh things out. And then finally things are going to be the same as the main character. It's all going to be inked in black, and I'm pretty excited about that. I just still feel like there could be so much more done. I really want to, I guess, bring it as close to a finalized state as possible, so that inking is really just going to be like the icing on the cake, basically. I'm just going to be refining things as much as possible and beautifying the image, as I like to say. I want to say it's like the fun stage, but honestly, all of it is. Like, right now, I think the most stressful point is at the very beginning, where it's like still not really sure where things are heading to. That question of like, is it going to turn out exactly how I imagine it to be? Is this just going to be a waste of time? That's always, I don't know. I think most artists have that in their process. But I'm going to speak for myself in this case. I'm going to say that that's something that does pop up. But I noticed that it really does go away the more you draw. So the more often you sit down and you practice and you challenge yourself, the less time you actually even have to like have that thought process. And honestly, I just started enjoying it, and I just stopped forgetting about like, where is it going? Is it gonna go? You know, like that goes away. And what stays is just really getting into the moment and really getting into the drawing and the process. You guys might have noticed that there have been a couple of streams where it gets kind of quiet, and that's just like me getting carried away with the drawing and focusing on all the lines and details, and kind of like the whole scene really just starts to, I get more and more sucked into it, kind of. So the process prevails again. You know, talking about Jimi Hendrix and what he was discussing, and then just having this be another example of exactly that, of how it really is very much about enjoying the process itself and getting into that mode of like self-expression and stuff. That's where art lives. So knock on that door when you forget it, when you forget about it. Knock on the door of the creative process and the process in general, to have it remind you like, hey, this is where the fun is. Coming up with these concepts, really getting involved in the drawing. And it's a repeating theme with a lot of other artists too. Like, you guys are familiar with Basquiat. He was also a really famous painter. I'm gonna say in the 80s, along with Andy Warhol. Like, Andy Warhol, I think, discovered him, or rather gave him fame and a stage, basically, because his work was still good. I mean, that's why Andy Warhol took interest in him, was because his work was interesting. So I'm gonna say, yeah, you just gave him a stage, but Basquiat was doing a lot of work, and he was also, unfortunately, really addicted to all sorts of drugs. But he definitely got carried away with the fame and popularity and like the attention, and it seemed like he always had people around in his studios, and you know, people were drinking and they were doing all sorts of drugs and all that. And you know, as long as he had the money, as long as he was able to provide all that stuff, people were always like hanging on him, and they were like, oh, you're so great, and this, that, and the other. And then when he started having, like, I guess, more issues with drugs, and, you know, financial issues and all that, all those people were nowhere to be found, you know, or just weren't as interested to hang around anymore, when that wasn't what he was doing. You know, when he was trying to like sober up, when he was trying to clean himself up and all those people who he thought were actually huge fans or whatever else were nowhere to be found. So again, what Jimi Hendrix was talking about applied there, and it happened very frequently. That was something that happened, I believe, with like a lot of different type of artists. I think it happened the same thing with like Kurt Cobain, and I could be wrong. I think that all the way through his life, I think he was just pretty famous, and everybody was always trying to be around him. But I'm not 100% on that. I haven't read his book. I did read the book on Basquiat a while ago, and it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. Really interesting insights. Him and Madonna were an item at some point. And I believe it was a tumultuous relationship. I'm not 100% sure. Forget. It was a while ago. Whoa, look at the time, man. That's ridiculous. Feels like it just started this stream. Well, time does fly when you're having fun, that's for sure. Well, thanks everybody. I think I'm gonna end the stream here for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. It was a blast as always. I will be back tomorrow for figure drawing basics at 8 p.m. and coloring comics, which I'm looking forward to. I don't know, I'm still trying to ink the panels so that I can actually color them, but I'm going to see. I'm going to look through and see which ones are done. And maybe tomorrow I'm going to jump back into using India inks, which I love, absolutely love. If you guys missed it, there are the recent ones, I want to say these past few weeks, where probably like 2 weeks ago, I'm going to say 2 weeks ago, you guys can check out the stream where I do India inks. There's also a special stream that you guys can find in that collections section in the highlights folder, where I do a comparison between watercolor and India inks. Yeah, it's a blast doing it. I'm so glad I made that purchase and switched over to India inks. But yeah, hopefully tomorrow I'll continue with that, or I'll be inking more panels. Either way, should be fun. So tune back in tomorrow, same time and place, right here at the Art Lounge Alley. If you guys enjoy the content, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both help the stream grow. And check out the Patreon page. Maybe one of those tiers can be for you. All right, y'all. I'll see you very soon.